The St. Albans City Historic Commission for June 23rd, 2025 at 5 p.m. Introduction of attendees. I'm Laz Skangas, I'm the chair.
I'm Joe Luna, I'm a member.
I'm Richard Stahl, and I'm the vice chair.
Aaron Garceau, I'm a resident, I suppose.
Becky Clyder, I'm a resident.
I'm Gracia Rao, I'm the Planning and Development Assistant for the city.
Don Crillo, committee member.
Lisa Papazian, consultant.
I'm Chip Sawyer, the Director of Planning and Development for the city.
Any public comment on issues not on the agenda?
We also have Elizabeth Peebles from the
Oh, she online?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for joining us, Elizabeth. Discuss additions or deletions to the agenda? I like it. Presentation of French Canadian Heritage District Project. Lisa, you want to take it?
Okay. I assume everyone can hear me. Okay. I don't need that.
A little louder.
A little louder. Okay. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. This is a pretty brief presentation. It's trying to hit the high points of the report I just submitted to the city, which is a summary of the early research and some of the early reconnaissance, meaning going out and looking at the properties in this survey phase of this project. And the project is to identify a French Canadian Heritage Neighborhood Historic District, identify what its parameters are in terms of period of significance. When does it historically start? When does it historically logically end? And then within that, also looking at right now our goal is, our next goal is to identify the boundaries, or at least a good sense of boundaries that we can go ahead and work with to focus on developing all the survey forms for the district. A second phase in the future is going to be the actual writing of a National Register nomination, which will include more history, more research, but probably not more documentation. So that's the part we're doing now. Page up?
Page down.
Page down.
Pointed at the,
Okay. So most of you know this, but for those who don't, the survey began, kicked off in September of last year, 2024. Initially, the map there shows all of those lettered areas together were what we were looking at as a potential district. It included about 300 properties, maybe more, which is a lot. So the whole thing was aided initially by volunteers who went out last year, 2 years ago, and looked at properties and looked at how they compared to what they looked like and were described as in a 1985 survey that first identified this area as potentially historic. So that was great information that was done by a lot of volunteers. Some photos were taken, lots of notes were taken, and it basically, that information said, yeah, we should go forward. The integrity is meaning what they look like, how much change has happened to the buildings is not too far different than what they were like in 1985 when they were considered. They're actually on the state register, so they were identified and listed on the state register at that time. So, with that sort of background, it's worth going forward. Fast forward to 2025. The list here of the streets are the streets that are within those lettered areas that we looked at. So in 2025, we needed, first of all, I knew for all the survey forms that we were going to need to produce, we needed new photographs of many of the buildings. Some of them were taken a couple years ago, and those were good, but some of them were not, and some of them needed to be retaken. So that was one phase of project that happened this spring when there were no leaves yet on the trees, which is a great time to take pictures of buildings. So a lot of those photos were taken. There still are some that need to be taken, but that's okay. We can sort of work with treeless streets that need to be taken or wait till the fall to take more. So what is this potential French-Canadian Heritage District? It represents a collection of 19th century railroad worker housing, which continued into the 20th century in terms of physical development. So there are properties that reflect many time frames between them, between those periods. It ended up, not initially, but it was initially a neighborhood developed in response to the railroad's need for a lot more workers when they, in 1860, it was headquartered here. Most of those workers were immigrants, many Irish, many French-Canadian. The neighborhood that developed west of the railroad tracks was about 50-50. By 1870, when it was developed, it was about 50-50, it seemed, Irish and French-Canadian owned or occupied. By the 1870s, later 1870s, the neighborhood was really much more of a concentration of French-Canadian immigrants. And that is largely because of the establishment of the Holy Angels Parish and church and school convent here in the neighborhood in 1872 and, going forward. That was a major social and, physical presence that anchored the community and encouraged French-Canadian immigrants lived all over St. Albans, going back to the early 19th century, based on census records and histories, but lived all over town. I'm going ahead, but anyway, the concentration, some probably moved to the neighborhood, or new immigrants would come and logically locate in a neighborhood where they felt more comfortable, where the French language was still spoken in the school, the church school, and also in many businesses. I used to do a lot of research. I was trying to establish, yes, it really was a concentration. This concentration, when it did start, how did it compare to the rest of the city? And I used census data, maps, historic maps, city directories from the 19th century and the 20th century, some written histories. And I will have to say that the census data is hard to work with because, and this is something that can be and should be explored in the future. Maybe when the nomination is done, or maybe as a school or student project or project of the Historical Society, to really drill down on the census data, which is very time consuming. So what the census data in 1850, it lists very few, things that people were responding to, questions that people were responding to. One of them was, where were you born? But it didn't ask where your parents were born. Later on, it started asking, where were you born, where were your parents born? So that added another layer of information that I could start adding up. Then at some point, there were too many people, so they weren't asking everybody where your parents born. They were only asking 4 out of the 20 people on the sheet. So then it was sort of more like an extrapolation from the data. That combined with the fact that, well, in the 1850s, you have an example is Ralph Lassalle. He was an immigrant in the 1850 census. By the 1870s, the Lassalles were no longer immigrants. They were no longer born in Canada, and their parents were no longer born in Canada, so except for the name, it doesn't show up directly as a French-Canadian family. So that tells me that there's a lot, other than the data that I actually got, there's a lot more, third, fourth, fifth generation families that are still here, even though they're not, a tick mark on our census data. So basically, I mean, there's, in the population of St. Albans itself, the whole town and then city, between 1850 and 1950, it was French-Canadian between 17% and 33%. But I think it was much higher because of what I just said. But in the neighborhood, it was after the 1870s, from what I was able to pull out of the directories combined with the census, it was more like 40 to even 70%, which is significant enough for me to say, yeah, this is definitely a district that we are now talking about listing potentially on the National Register under criterion A, not C. Now, A is really where, these are criterion of significance. Why is this property or district significant to American history? And there are several criteria. Criterion A is really focused on broad patterns of history, local history, state history. Criterion C, which B is people, like famous people, important people. C, where a lot of districts are often listed, is the one where architecture is the most important, or types of buildings, for example, or an entity that is architecturally significant because you can identify it as a neighborhood or district of similar types of architecture. So this is a neighborhood that has changed a lot over time. Most of the houses are still there, a lot of them from the 1860s, 70s, 80s, but a lot has changed, like especially the siding, for example. There's a lot of synthetic siding. But I think that I discussed this with Elizabeth, who hopefully has something to say about it, that this is not where this district's significance is, not its architecture, it's the identity of the neighborhood, that it felt like a family, a group of people with this common heritage, and it was reinforced through use of the language in schools and, as I said, on the street probably, and in businesses. Let's get to a picture. No. Yes. Okay. So again, the period of significance now, I'm suggesting, starts in 1860, and the map on the left shows is a map of this area. Is there a pointer?
No, unfortunately.
Okay, I'll be clear. This is Elm Street, Champlain Street is Lake Street, and Weldon Street is Weldon Street. This is Pearl here, and this is actually Pine. So this is showing the railroad is just there, just barely there, maybe in 1857, but it hadn't, this area hadn't really fully developed, which started in the 1860s. This is the area I crudely circled in a 1946 Sanborn map. That's this area. So it was really pretty fully developed by then. And it has been suggested that 1965 or somewhere in the 60s is an appropriate ending because it coincides with the closing of one of the most important sort of culturally anchoring entities, which was the school, the parish school. So that's what we're sort of going with. We don't have, 1950 is the last census that's public, so we don't have the 1960 census. We do have directories, and they sort of indicate names, but it's a more of a sense of what should the residents or people who grew up in the neighborhood really feel like. It was feeling cohesive through my childhood, and then less so when, I was a teenager or so, and that's, I think, what we're hearing. So in the 70s, it felt less cohesive, perhaps. So we're going to go with 1965. That may be open for negotiation in the future. Again, a couple of map comparisons. This, I mentioned earlier, this is an 1871 map, so it's the next available historic map after that 1857 map. This is, again, a detail of the neighborhood, Lake Street in the middle. This is, but it's more of it. This is Walnut Street, Cedar Street, Russell, Huntington. All of these streets had been developed between 1857 and 1871. And I tried to color code it, green for Irish and purple for French Canadian, based on what I was able to find out from directories and census. So it was about 50-50%, 50-50, I would say, including others that don't fall into either groups. And then the map on the right was a map that Louise Haynes developed. And these show buildings, and the red marked ones are ones that have French Canadian families, and that's based on a 1930s directory. So it's much more concentrated by this time, was the point of showing these two maps. And another thing to consider is the integrity of the architecture. As I mentioned earlier already, the majority of the buildings in the district are residential, many single family, some duplexes, a few larger houses. Many of the single family homes that were larger were in fact used as multifamily homes based on census data through the 19th century and even early 20th century. And there are styles from the 19th century, including Greek Revival, Gothic Revival, Italianate, Queen Anne, and then 20th century styles, because the Sanborn map, which I showed you, the 1946 Sanborn map, some of the earlier ones show that essentially between that 1871 map, where a lot of the buildings were already built, by the 1920s, big long lots were starting to be divided. And more, there was like another wave of building infill. And a lot of those are colonial revival buildings and bungalows, smaller houses. Most of these are still there. So there were only a few commercial properties along Lake Street. The one large brick building, commercial building, still there. And a few smaller buildings that were used commercially, many of them not now, but and a lot of, as I said, a lot of these houses have been altered. Most of the alterations are, as I said, addition of synthetic siding. Sometimes the windows have been swapped out. Often the porches have been enclosed to add to the floor area. But a lot of the form of the building is still there. You can still see it, especially if you look down the street and see a row of similar sized gable roofed houses. You can definitely see the patterns. And so you'd expect more change. And of course, those alterations were often made before 1960, actually, or before 1970, by many of the French Canadian families. These were their choices. So in a way, the changes, I think, are very reasonable. And, I haven't found it yet, but, for all I know, the aluminum siding salesman was French Canadian, one of the local building supplies. There were an awful lot of French Canadian owned businesses.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
If we're going under criteria A, which is the cultural community and the families and everything, what does it matter, the integrity of the architecture? Because we're not going after it. We're going after a cultural community that was here and developed it.
What we've talked about with Elizabeth at the state, who's on the line, was the sense that once we identify the end of the period of significance, 1965, say, the idea is that someone who grew up there, or if you took someone off the street from 1965 and brought them here today, they would still recognize the neighborhood. It would still be recognizable to them. The buildings weren't changed so much or replaced by new buildings so much that they wouldn't be able to recognize it. And I would argue, for example, Pine Street which in the 19th century and early 20th century was lined with small houses. Almost all of those are gone, replaced by 1970s and 80s houses. So that's a street that, very reasonably someone might not recognize anymore. But the other streets, I would argue, are still quite recognizable. So that, we're going to have to work with Elizabeth on this in terms of defining a level of integrity and change in the architecture that's acceptable versus what isn't. And I would say we're going to look at some
I
pictures
know,
and we
but
can
I
talk
guess what
about
I'm
it.
saying, that the architecture is not the important element.
No, it isn't.
So it shouldn't be driving what we're doing.
No, but I think it's important that, it's important that the architecture in the boundaries we select reflect the period.
I totally agree.
Right.
I don't
Which is a
disagree. I just-
big period.
Yeah, I mean, buildings change over time.
Right.
So it's not surprising to see that siding has changed or that porches have been enclosed. But that's not the selling point of this district.
No, but it might be, I'm going to let Elizabeth
Yep.
talk in a second, but I just want to say that one level of alteration that might be too far, like, maybe it's an 1880s house, but the fenestration, meaning the pattern of windows, have all been changed. They used to be, 2/2 windows, and they've all been changed to picture windows, for example, or the door has been relocated to a different place. That might be too much change.
But if a French-Canadian family, 4 generations lived there,
It's
what
true.
does it matter?
Okay, I'll let Elizabeth answer
Okay.
that.
I'm going to chime in really quickly. So we're talking about period of significance, which is great. But that's really part of your next round. You're still in survey, let's figure out what's here. And, once you have all of that, then we can really dive into the specifics. And when we're talking about nominating a district under criteria A, the question of those changes and, if it's a French-Canadian family making those changes, is did that change happen during that period of significance? Right? So if it was a French-Canadian family that made the change after the period of significance for the neighborhood, then that could negatively impact the historic integrity of that resource. Does that make sense?
It doesn't, because if a French-Canadian family made that change and there were 4 generations that lived in that house, we're not looking at the building itself, we're looking at the family that lived there for 4 generations. Right? We're going after this because this is a French-Canadian district, not an architectural gem.
If I could, I think the way that I'm hearing it is the final product is going to be the story of the neighborhood and the culture and everything that goes
Right.
along with it. But at some point, you're going to have to define size and shape.
And I don't.
And I guess you can't get to the second part until you
And I
finish
don't
the first
disagree,
part.
but if a building has a lot of change to it, we should not exclude it because it has a lot of change if we know a French-Canadian family lived there for 50 years.
I wasn't hearing that we're going to disclude because of siding and stuff. She was saying that it's probable that it was changed by the families.
Right.
It sounded like there was leeway in there.
Right.
I think there's leeway in there, but what Elizabeth was pointing out is once we determine what the end date is, then what she's saying is it may not matter who changed it after that end date. Again, this may be premature to really have this in-depth discussion at this point.
I'm only bringing it up because you brought it up.
Yeah.
Because you talked
well,
about integrity of architecture.
Well, that's what this is the National Register of Historic Places, which is about buildings and sites.
Yes, but that's not what's driving this project.
It's not just a history project.
That's right.
And a district is defined by its ability to convey visually, to convey the importance that it is nominated for. And so its ability to convey a neighborhood that is familiar or would be recognizable when the community was in its heyday, for example, That's, I think, where we're aiming for,
Where Pine Street doesn't look anything like it, and has totally different buildings, and
as opposed to,
70
yes,
years,
exactly.
70 years ago it might have made the cut, but today it doesn't.
Right.
But also tangentially to Laz's comments, there was a St. John the Baptist Club, which is, you're already on that? Okay.
No, I talked about it in my report, but I wasn't going to, but.
So the primary building is torn down. However, the storage area is part of the Beverage Mart wine cellar. And if you go in there, there's a vertical beam that still says that. And
Does
you
it?
can't,
I
yes.
didn't know that.
So there's a small part of it that's extant.
Small part.
Yes. Well, you wouldn't know unless you bought wine at the Beverage Mart.
Nothing to whine-
Somebody told me about that.
Nothing to whine about.
And pre-Vatican II, at the very least, homilies were, if not exclusively, generally given in French at Holy Angels.
Which is 62?
Yeah, that's about.
Yeah.
Do you know, is the Jean Baptiste organization still?
No,
In
it does
existence?
not exist, not in St. Albans, it doesn't.
Okay. Let's go. Oh, right. So what I was, the crux of what I was sort of getting to is my thoughts about the district boundaries, just based on integrity.
Madison knew better than to ruin that. He left it alone. That's how.
Lake Street.
It is cool. It really is. I don't even drink. It's cool.
Except for this little spot, which is now a big building. Forget that. And this line is essentially Cedar Brook. I would say that Maple Street, Pine Street, and this piece of LaSalle and Pearl and Lake have lost so much integrity that I would I would put the eastern boundary at the brook, essentially, which is the back of these property lines on Spruce and Oak. On the other side, based on the history, I was, finding the census records, the directories. It seemed like both Huntington and Walnut were very much part of the community. Although Huntington is kind of on its own, it doesn't connect the way the others do. So I feel like that is something to explore further in terms of adding. I just drove the district this afternoon, and I would agree, I still believe this is, I looked at it based on Google, and I went today. I think that Walnut Street is about similar in integrity to Cedar Street. Huntington, less so. There's a lot of new construction on Huntington and alteration. So this one may not be, but I would suggest we might include this. And I think that the center section, which was part of the original, definitely holds up. Based on this kind of idea of some changes, okay. As long as you can sort of read the architecture still, I think it's okay.
So you want to add that section because French families lived there, or because the architectural
Both.
integrity matches
Both.
the centerpiece?
No, there's definitely history, there's definitely data that shows that it was just as, I think, heavily French-Canadian as, the rest of the district.
Okay.
It was, does anyone else have that sense just from,
No,
that was
generally agree
definitely
with
what the
it.
directories are showing.
Maple, it's south of LaSalle. I think there might be a couple left.
There
but
are a
that-
couple.
But it might not be enough to really
Well,
be
there are
worth.
a couple left, you're right, right down here, but now there's a huge new.
Yes,
And an empty lot,
so it may not be worth you.
I'm not sure it's worth it. I mean, also, out here to the town city line, it doesn't really change all that much along Lake Street, but you have to draw the line somewhere. And Huntington, I would say there are some gems on Huntington for sure, but they're pretty, like it's
Isolated.
I'd say less than 40%, maybe even less than that.
That seems right.
We're already talking about a pretty big district, and
Fair enough.
Joe, you know what the challenges of that.
Yeah, sorry, Maple Street.
That's okay.
So-
I was just gonna Go ahead.
I mean, I think I understand I understand the distinction. It's a two-part test. One is you've got to establish an area that was predominantly French Canadian between 1870 and 1970. And then lot by lot, when we decide if we're going to label a building as contributing or not, is that going to happen with this? The contributing versus? No, okay. But still,
Right, Elizabeth? Am I right about that? We're not doing that.
I have to double check with your grant agreement, but I don't think you are.
We're just doing
maybe-
individual forms, yeah.
You're doing survey forms and making general recommendations, I believe.
Okay.
so it's going to be interesting to find out to what degree does it even matter whether or not a building, and we're going to show pictures of all the houses. And we're going to focus on the ones that still look the way we think they did back when it was a French Canadian neighborhood.
But we're gonna write them up all the same. We're gonna do a very form for all.
Well, just like you do with a regular, you write up every building, it's just you sometimes say this one's not contributing,
Yes.
right? For various reasons, but you still write up the building in a historic
Right,
district.
but we say it's not contributing because it's architectural.
Right, because it's criterion C.
Right.
Right. It seems like this
Or it
thing.
was built too recently. I mean, that's.
So this issue about whether or not the building's been heavily modified since 1970, or it's really going to only matter at the edges of the map. Because otherwise, everyone who's in the map is in the map.
It is, it's
Yeah.
true. I mean, it's important to know along Elm Street or, Russell Street, how many on that street are contributing versus non-contributing, and if a lot more than we thought are non-contributing because of too much alteration or because they're newer buildings, we might reconsider whether that's worth including or not.
But if a family lived there I hate to keep going back to this, but if a family lived there, a French Canadian family lived there for 4 generations, it doesn't matter what the architecture is, because that's not what this is about.
But we just won't show that house as an example of what it looked like. We'll
But
we'll include the parcel in the map, but
But if you're talking about maybe not including that area because 3 or 4 buildings have been
Right.
changed. But if French Canadians lived there for 4 generations, why aren't we including? It doesn't matter what the architecture is. What am I missing here?
Well, first of all, there's got to be a limit to the research we can do on every single property.
That's right. And we kind of set the boundaries based on the map that Louise Haynes did of where all the French Canadian families live. That's how we started this whole thing, because we wanted to include French Canadian families.
Right.
And that's how this whole thing started. And I don't see where it makes sense if a building's been changed so much that it doesn't fit the mold, that we don't include that area, because if 3 or 4 of those buildings have changed, we don't include them in that because of that. But if families live there and they're French Canadians, that should be included.
But if you apply like a percentage to whatever the road is 30 or 40%, and eventually it's 70 or 80% or whatever it is, but
Well, right, that can help set the boundary, but I just,
But I mean, if a French Canadian family tore down their 1880 house and in 1990 built a new house on the same spot, I would have a hard time.
That's why we excluded Pine Street, because it all changed.
Right, I don't know who
Right.
built those houses.
Right. But most of the areas that we have picked was because French Canadians lived there.
Yes.
And most of the buildings are intact. Yes, they've been changed and updated, but they're still there. So I guess, to me, what should be driving this, and I hate to keep repeating myself, is French Canadians who live there, not whether the architecture is 1940s or 1870s or 1960s.
Well, I think, I understand that, and I agree that a lot of change is, in my mind, is acceptable in this district. But I also, it's a district because, I mean, it's a potentially National Register district because as a whole, the collection of buildings
Right.
conveys something. And one of the things it conveys is the range of dates, how long this community has been
And I don't
here.
disagree with you.
So you have to have a little of all of it.
Yeah, and it's gonna have a mix of stuff, and you can walk down and you can see the neighborhood. There might be one odd building that, has just been modified to hell, or have had 3 or 4 additions, and it's got vinyl siding and metal roofs and big vinyl windows and all that, but it's still part of that community.
So you're saying nothing should be, once you decide on the boundaries, nothing should be non-contributing.
Can I
If a French family lived there, yes, it should not be eliminated. That's a
Can
whole
I-
point of this.
I think Elizabeth is trying to.
Yeah,
Say-
sorry,
Yeah.
Liz, didn't mean to
No,
cut-
no, no. You guys are all making really great points. I just want to kind of back us up for a second, right? You guys are undertaking a survey project, which is wonderful, and you have multiple paths in front of you. And right now, we don't really need to get into too much about the NR district boundary. That's something that we will figure out with your next phase of the project. For the survey project, Lisa will make recommendations based off of this. But for right now, what I'm understanding is after this initial pass, there's an area that Lisa's saying that there's not a lot of integrity. And then there's this area outside of the initial survey area that she thinks has a lot of potential. And so you can choose to stick with your current survey boundary that you had initially established. You can choose to do your full current survey area and expand it to this new area she's identified. Or if there's limited time, money, resources, you can adjust the map boundary for your survey project to remove out areas that you're confident don't need further research, so that you can use some of your resources and reallocate it to this area that maybe you had not initially anticipated. Or you can say, this expanded area, we're going to come back and ask for more money and do it as an add-on before we go forward with the NR nomination and do a second survey project. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I just want to, so
Can I ask one quick? Was that section that you want to add not in Louise Haynes?
it wasn't in Louise's.
Did you ask her why it wasn't? Did you get any feedback from her?
I didn't, I haven't, I should ask her exactly that question. I'm just going back to, come on. Yeah, hers, this is, I think that's, wait a minute. I think this is, yeah, this is L, LaSalle, Cedar. Russell. No, it doesn't go west of that.
I'm just curious why she did not. I mean, because she was locating French Canadian families, and if that next block was, it just seems odd she left it off the list.
Poster board is too small.
Yeah, I mean.
That's what I was thinking.
There's not
around.
enough
Poster
room
board
for
is
a
too
piece of
small.
paper, right.
I spoke with her yesterday, and she thought that we were walking today, and so, which is difficult for her.
Yeah,
So
I
she-
think
she
Lisa
does.
would be good to ask her.
Well, I,
And find, if there were reasons that maybe we're not aware of,
absolutely, we should ask her. I mean, she was using the 1930s directories, and I've looked at those directories, and based on those, I would say, I'm not sure why Huntington wouldn't be included, but
yeah. I think it'd be a
it's
good
worth
question.
asking her. It certainly would have been, like the earlier directories. There's some 1890s directories and 1915 directories that definitely show Huntington as an area where there are.
But she grew up, she knew everybody, so it's strange that there was this block.
I'm just saying, before she was born,
Yeah,
there was another history of the
Yeah,
neighborhood that still might.
I think another cool thing in the proposed district is there are a lot of buildings that were commercial buildings for much, if not all, of the period of significance that are, for the most part, residential now. But there was a much more robust commercial presence in the area. in the-
So I was just going to look at some pictures. I put in some pictures, or we could go to
Yes.
Google
Yes, I
Let's
was in the
show
board with
these
him briefly.
pictures.
Yeah,
And then
but he had a lot to do with that.
Yes, I worked with Louise on that.
Yes.
And he gave me
down.
all his
Page down.
Yes.
backup.
Oh, you
Put it
did?
at the
You did.
projector.
He's still around. You can,
Oh, I know, we don't see him anymore, though.
but,
He's
Maybe
sort
it's
of
given up.
become a hermit almost.
but if you contacted
But
him,
he's not in town.
but if
But
you
he's got
con-
a camp on Georgia Shore.
but if you
Okay.
contacted him with something pertinent, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think you would have, yeah.
Yeah, it'd be
Yeah,
cool.
no, he,
So I just threw in some examples of resources just as talking points. So these are all on Cedar, and the ones on the left, 8 and 10 Cedar, were probably identical, and there might have been more of them originally. They've been altered with the enclosure of the porches, but you can still see what they were. Their forms still look pretty closely similar. So that's what I mean by the form is still there. It's still legible in terms of its architecture. The enclosure of the porches, is pretty common throughout the neighborhood, but it's still a porch. It's not like been, blown up into an addition, for example. And the one on the right is, it has been altered also, including its porch is really enclosed over there on the left. But it still has its, two-story bay window. It has other Victorian features in the form. This one's, that's on the edge of having been modified a lot, I think. But I would still say it should be included. Okay. Gosh.
Oh,
It has given up. And these are similar houses to those ones on Cedar that are on Walnut Street. So it's almost the same house, except in this case they're dormers. Similar, there's a lot of things. They're small, simple houses, and you see them all over.
Almost looks like the same photo, just on a different day.
Well, it's almost as though it's the same builder.
Yeah.
And that may well have been the case. I wasn't able to dig deep enough to really get into who was building these, other than LaSalle, which is a really interesting story. I mean, he was a brick maker. And he was building houses and advertising them like on spec. He was advertising these brick houses for sale, but it also mentions in the ad that you can call him, or you can also call the railroad agent, which I thought was interesting. So he might have been building them for the railroad or in conjunction with the railroad on spec. There's still at least 5 of those in the neighborhood.
and a lot of it would have been if they were empty lots, a
They were.
developer or someone would have come in and bought 5 or 6 properties and boom, boom, boom.
And I've been doing a lot of newspaper research as well, and there are many mentions of buying. I have all these lots for sale. I have these
Yep.
new houses for sale, so I have that background
Yep.
too. And so a lot of these weren't, necessarily one family bought a lot and built a house on their own. They bought a house that was built.
I don't know if this is a little bit off topic, but kind of the second phase that you were talking about, the written histories or the kind of the stories that go along with all this kind of establishing the boundaries and whatnot. Being a railroad town and there's so many railroad workers, I know Sears Craftsman homes were famously delivered by rail and built a lot. Is there
I don't
any
see them.
kind of,
I don't see them
nothing
in
with the
this
railroad
neighborhood.
history that would suggest?
They
that
are
maybe-
up on the other side.
They're up on the hill.
Yeah, we have a
Yeah.
handful like up on the hill that
Yeah.
are Sears Craftsman homes, but
Makes
is
sense.
this a different story? It's not Sears, but just a local or
Yeah.
regional builder that could have, and is there railroad history that we could be looking at that might kind of, or other?
The fact that they're asking the railroad agent, would the railroad finance these houses because it's railroad employees? And didn't they have the bank at the same time? The People's Trust Day was a railroad bank.
Yeah, I think that is a story that needs to be fully told.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to do it yet, but I'm not even sure it's ultimate scope. But that's definitely how you dig down. Like the other way you dig down in finding out who lived here over time in the census after census, as I mentioned, after a certain point, you don't identify as, even my mother was born in Canada, but you can look up those names that seem French 30 years ago and find out what those names were. 30, 40 years ago, census data might say, oh yeah, that family did come from Canada, and you can show it.
Did you guys look at any of the resources at the Holy Angels Rectory?
I have not.
Because I know that when I first came and started doing all my genealogy research, I couldn't find much in the city, and censuses are hard to get through sometimes. But their books are just full of who lived and was born and was married and what street they were on. And
That goes to what, maybe we do have a way of doing that research easily.
Well,
Maybe it
but
is in
I also
place.
think Louise did some of that,
yeah,
because that's how
a good
she
suggestion.
Yeah.
based on the houses. But going back to...
you could sit and read those books for hours.
Going back to Richard's, from the history that I've read on the CV, they never did that.
No, they didn't. It just seemed like a natural, though.
There's one on that 1857, we don't have a lot of historic maps, unfortunately. They're pretty far between, but on that 1857 map, there is where is it? It's south of the district. I can't remember what. Anyway, there's a little cluster in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing else around it, but it just says railroad tenements. There's like 3 buildings. So clearly, at a certain point, they did build themselves, those buildings. But I'm not surprised. I mean, it wasn't the railroad agent. It was one of the Smiths was the name to contact. One of the Smiths who owned the railroad. I can't remember which one. It's in my report, but yeah, there's a lot of great information pulled out of these newspapers because of newspapers.com. Thank you very much. It would have been impossible otherwise. So, again, this is on Huntington. Similar buildings, but there are a lot fewer of them. And in between, just based on what I was now just writing now, Huntington, Maine. You guys should look at it too. And that's why I wanted everyone to have this map. Go down and see, should this be added? Maybe not, maybe. And this is 2 different buildings on Cedar, and I found another one on Walnut, I think. They have these clipped corners. It's another, detail that is probably indicative of a similar builder, or why pay someone to develop plans when you can just buy, John's plan over here.
There's a lot of houses like that in the whole city. I did a whole write-up on just that particular
Corner thing.
feature. Yeah, it's
Well, actually,
everywhere.
that's true in the brick downtown. There's a lot of those.
Some of them just have brackets, but a lot were also taken off because they fell apart.
Well, they're cutting corners.
Oh. Wow, that's like your third one
Credit
today.
card, thank you. Almost an hour for one of those.
I know, it's really been holding back.
This one doesn't have an awful lot of its details. It's Victorian. This sort of double steep pointed arches are sort of a Gothic revival. It's an early building that was added to, I think, later. Maybe it's not as early, but there are a number of these also, these twin, very steep pitched roofs. And this one again showing Queen Anne features. But, the siding changes. The bungalow, this is a great one. I know. And just more of a bungalow style, smaller house, mostly from the 20s and 30s.
Totally off topic, but I think there was someone going around saying, at some point, just putting eyebrow windows in. My house has one. I've documented 15, 16 other houses that just have them, and I just don't, unless someone had one, and then everyone else all of a sudden wanted.
I actually think of it as as somewhat of a French feature. The sort of swoop, that's a very French.
The last Smith mansion that Dr. Manchester lives in has 2 of them that you can only see in the winter if you happen to be up on Prospect Street there, looking at just the right. I mean, there's a lot of them. I don't see them in any other towns as much as I do here.
Well, if you go up further north, I was recently in Coventry and Derby Line, and noticing that, you know, on the Canadian border, a lot of the towns have, and if you go to Canada, you see a lot more of this. Instead of just a hipped roof or a simple gable, it's this swoosh at the end. It's very French. Yeah, this is one of the properties that Joe was talking about, was originally a store on Lake Street. And again, Pearl is another mixed bag, but it's a connector, so in terms of integrity, there's a lot of newer houses on Pearl too, but there's some great, that's one, obviously, two sides of one house, just showing its Victorian features. I think that's, there's also a few individually eligible buildings, one of which is already listed, which is the convent, which is listed individually. Certainly the church, and this was originally a house, a farmhouse, part of the estate, on the corner of Pearl and North Elm, but in 1889 it was bought and converted to the convent and school for Holy Angels for 10 years until they built the convent on Lake Street. And that school, I don't think it was originally part of the, I think it was just a school.
It's a public school.
Public
Yeah.
school, built in the
Neighborhood school.
1860s. But again, I'm guessing LaSalle had something to do with building it, because he was the brickmaker. Again, these are the brick. These are three of the brick houses. One on spruce and two on elm. One is painted. Actually, there's three on elm.
And you're sure LaSalle built these
Yeah, because he advertised it.
with these addresses?
No, because they didn't have addresses. But it's pretty clear to me that the only brick buildings on these streets and it, correspond to the number of buildings. So,
No, I'm just asking because I know a lot of brick buildings in St. Albans use Drury bricks out of Essex. That's the only reason I'm asking the question.
I'm guessing there's another, yeah. I suspect.
Yeah.
I think that the ad is a pretty good indication.
Okay.
So this is Pine Street. This is typical of Pine. And, you know, going further west, like Adams Street is all new,
Range
west
branches.
of Walnut. And
Mostly.
there's, on the edges, there's a
It's like what
lot
I grew
more
up in.
of these kind of houses, which are
No.
70s, 80s, early 80s. They were there in 85.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with them, but
think
they're
that's all.
no good for the purposes of what we're.
But you knew where every kid's bathroom was. You can go in their
Unless we
house
want
and
to-
know exactly where everything was.
Unless we
Yes.
want to actually explore via Google, or I invite you to take the map and explore on your own. And,
Chip, could we take Google and go down the street that she wants to add to?
Do you wanna drive on Street View, or do you want me to drive?
you can drive.
Stop sharing over here.
Sometimes I do this in the winter and then I actually visit the place. And I feel like I've already been there. And it's really weird because then I'm like, well, how did I get my car? You ever drive around on Street View?
Not that much. I used to. I used to do like anything where you knock on doors so I could go in the house. You know, for not hard or something.
Okay, yeah. No, you don't even have to go anywhere. You just drive around the streets on your computer and it's
Yes.
like you've been there.
Yeah, we got, look, but I think I'd agree with Lisa's recommendations.
Oh, if
for
you hit
proposed
more? Okay.
Changes
That's another.
in the boundaries.
All right. So here's the Holy Angels campus. Where do you want to go? Like the center of our district.
Are we going down toward Walnut?
Let's go down to that neighborhood
Yeah.
that Lisa
Walnut,
wants to
let's go
add.
to Walnut.
And down, we're,
I would also
Heading
mention
towards
that
Cedar?
the 1950s school, the Holy Angel School, the 1950s building or 60s building, I would say that's historic as well.
Yep, yeah, it's a 50s building.
I remember finding the newspaper article showing it opening. Can't remember what it was, but yeah, 58 or something.
That sounds right.
Are we on?
I don't think I've shot past it yet.
No,
It's
you're getting
farther out
close. I
there.
think it's right
Okay.
there.
So this is Walnuts, that's, I believe is this Huntington or is this Murray Drive?
No,
What's
it's
Huntington?
Murray. I
Yeah.
think.
Is it? Am I wrong?
Huntington is further west.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
That's Murray Drive. So.
And Murray Drive is mostly pretty new. So this end of Walnut Street, the south end, has a number of newer buildings on it, but it gets more, well, except for that one.
Yeah,
Um,
this one looks newer,
Yeah,
but then this next one,
yeah, see,
That's twins.
those are the ones
Yeah.
I had photographed. Quote,
Yeah.
unquote, so these are newer
so
buildings.
the two newer buildings.
But then you get to several that are, have been there for a while. Hard to say exactly, 1900 maybe?
It's so nice and cool outside.
I know.
Yeah, it looks like it's about 65.
Yeah.
Looking at the houses.
It's the fall.
It's the fall, right?
It's the
It's
fall. It's
October,
probably October.
Febreze looks
Let's have some
like
political
still right.
signs.
so that's maybe a newer house there,
Right here?
maybe, hard to know.
Yeah, but not this one.
No. I don't think so, I think that one's older, yeah. That one,
This one's interesting.
the blue one,
Yeah, I mean,
but this one
I think that the majority of them are,
are older.
yeah.
Do you think someone added like a honking porch to this house right here?
I think they modified the porch.
Yeah,
They,
right.
I'm sure it had a porch.
Now we're looking at, is this an original bungalow
I
perhaps?
think it is,
Yeah.
It's a
With
sweet
an
little
addition
bungalow.
on the side?
Yeah, you see that little peak that comes out up there in the corner. Yeah. It's classic bungalow.
Cool. And then if we go across the street, looking older,
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
But again, if someone from 1965 were to walk down that street, they
Like
would
that one.
probably know just where they were.
Right, and then there's this one.
Say that again? I'm sorry.
If someone from 1965 who grew up in that neighborhood were to walk down the street today, they would
They would
most
know where
likely
they
still
were.
recognize right where they were. The trees would be a little bit bigger.
Not to try and advocate one way or the other, but is there a lot of value in expanding and expanding and expanding, or is just the condensed district that we started with kind of tell the story and
That's a really
Or
good,
is that something
that's
to
a
kinda
really,
consider,
really
like-
good question. I'm just putting it out there that it doesn't seem, it seems similar
yeah?
in history and integrity to Cedar, so I think it's worth considering, but it's a very good point.
Since he's finished.
But another piece of the National Register, you can't just sort of arbitrarily decide the boundaries of a district because you only have $10,000, for example, or can't afford to make it bigger, or it's inconvenient to make it bigger. If the resources continue and look
So
the
the answer is-
same,
the answer
if
is
you
they
can't
have-
visually see the boundary, then it's probably not a good idea to cut it off. But it's definitely a really good question and will be explored further as we get closer.
It'd be interesting to see what Louise's feedback is.
Yeah,
For the National Register nomination, if that goes forward, one part of the nomination is writing a boundary justification. And the boundary justification can't just be, and that's where we stopped our survey. It needs to be, this is the edge of why the neighborhood's significant.
yeah, you have to justify your boundaries.
So that's Walnut.
I should get him an innocent player.
Maybe we should go quickly down Huntington.
You stabbed that a lot of stuff. That North Elm school. Look how much has changed.
Oh, yeah. And that's the same.
It's the same one. This is just from 1905.
It starts out with some older
This
houses
is what they did when they turned it into apartments.
on one side. On the other side is almost all new
I barely
houses.
remember this is school.
And someone who requested the
Right. I
You-
think,
You can see past the window. It squeaked another
again,
window.
that might be an older house or it might be
Two
a
or
new
three
one.
up there.
I don't know.
So I wonder if that
But it
counts as
continues with
significant change.
more and more houses on the east side.
The original purpose.
Right.
Older
I
houses
mean,
on
you still
the
have
west
the,
side, but also some newer
you
houses.
still have the original, even the corbels.
There's a nice little cluster further down, but again, there's a lot of newer stuff in between.
Seems like Bob
So
Coffee was.
I think it's something to consider,
Maybe.
but,
I put that one 5 years ago.
You've done an
It's a
amazing
good thing
job.
for Facebook, because my
Every
memory's not
scene
that
that-
good.
Oh, I love everything you posted.
it doesn't seem to have as much integrity for sure.
Now I'm done
Plus
with,
it's
now I'm done
a
with school,
little
so I'll be back on again.
Sort of an appendage.
The last 2 months.
on
It is all by itself out there.
Yeah.
And I would say the best cluster is way down. It's in
Oh, the
south.
Sears, oh, the High Brainerd, the
Was-
one
are
that
you-
Vicaries at one.
Yeah.
Are you familiarized where the municipal line is on Huntington?
No. Is there,
And Chip could put, there is, yeah. The end of Huntington is in, the south is in St. Albans town.
on the south end?
Yeah, in
Oh,
the south
okay.
end.
Right around in here,
That's
That
about
makes
right.
sense.
I think it's where the sidewalk is. Maybe.
Well,
I was gonna say, is there a line in the pavement where like the
I
city's?
was gonna say, there on Lake Street, as you're going west,
mud.
That's right.
right after you hit St. Albans town, there's a really great brick building on the corner, but it's not in the city.
Well,
It looks like the sidewalk extends past the city boundary.
A little bit, not too much, but it does a little bit.
So we could,
Yeah,
oh, yeah.
right there.
So does that cut off, can you go down this way? Does that cut off, is it Edward or Russell?
No, Russell's all in
Oh,
the city.
okay.
Edward is all in.
I
gotta
mean,
know that
that's
stuff,
another
just like
question,
you're doing
you know,
doors.
going past
There's nothing
Lower
worse than
Weldon
going
or
outside
not.
your district.
What did I say?
Everybody's done it. If they say they haven't, they're lying. Or they haven't done the job.
I think that Russell, it's actually still good past Lower Weldon for a little ways.
that's not easy, going ask people to vote.
No, it's traumatic. And
That would be,
Yeah.
yeah. For me to do.
There's a lot of little houses.
I'll put lit there.
And we knew French
If
Canadians.
you come out and you want to speak, but I'm not going to
And
rap
we
on
knew
your door.
French Canadians.
Yeah, we all appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't want my door wrapped on. Who the hell wants that?
Not really. I agree.
Yeah.
Put my lid there, so yeah, and sometimes somebody will come out.
there's a lot.
That's
At
up
the
to
end,
them.
it just,
But you don't
I think
appreciate
I
that.
wrote
That's
down,
a piece.
after number 45 and 46, it's all newer. So-
But at the same time, you gotta, you can't be.
So I don't know if it's worth going on Cedar or Elm just to compare.
Before I get home.
We could do that.
True. Except retired people.
Yeah. There's a couple guys that think it's like beer time every time I go there, so. I'm like, don't
Elm
go
is
to
a
their
lot
house until
older.
it's like
North Elm.
Done.
That street shows up on the 1857
Remember
map.
John Doherty? He's not alive anymore. He lived on Diamond Street and like, yeah, it's awful.
Yeah, almost all of that are.
Yeah, I mean, some have been modified, but almost all of them are older, and they were mostly built out by, by 1900. Elm Street was sort of as populated as it is now by buildings.
We were just talking about the North Elm Street School. It has, the face of it has actually changed dramatically.
Which one?
The North Elm Street School that you have on there. Changing from a school to an apartment building, that you almost don't recognize it unless you notice the
The old
corbels and
school,
stuff.
the
That one
public
right
school.
there.
Yeah,
I have a picture of it from 1905, and that bottom is full of windows, but
Yeah, they
in the-
cut them down.
In the photo, it's just a door and 2 windows, and then they added extra windows to the top as well.
Really?
But you can,
What was that?
Here's the driveway. Oh, yeah.
Here, I can-
He's
I can
got
show
the
you the
picture
picture.
I
here.
think it looks much nicer now.
I think that might be the back.
I think that might be the other side.
Yeah,
Yeah.
looks like the rear.
The only reason I say that is because these are brick arches around these windows.
yeah, so if you look at well, unless by the back you mean the opposite side,
Maybe that was where it was entered.
because
originally.
if you look at, you can still see, chimney
Is it
and the
chimney
the
line
dormer and
kind of
everything
orientate?
here. Unless this is on the backside you can't have access to, and then everything else is around the other
I think
side.
that, I've been there, and I feel like that's the back.
Yeah.
The one with the one door.
I've walked by there a million times. I've never been in that property.
Too bad we can't go
It's a
outside.
great photo, though.
I mean, we can't.
Oh, too bad nobody wants to go outside.
Can you do an aerial and see if we can, if there's an angle where we can see the back of the building?
Get up on the
It's still 90 out there.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, hopefully my
Yeah,
wife
91.
Yeah,
Still,
this might explain
about
it.
5
This is
a.m.
the stoop
I
over
was up there early this morning, too.
I'll be there tomorrow around that time.
Does that picture show a stoop over the door?
Is the
let's
door
see.
on the side or in the center?
Yeah, there's a
Not-
set of
not
stairs.
quite as big as
But
that.
there's a set of stairs and then there's a covered, see above the door?
It's just like a
Yeah.
little,
Yeah,
Yeah, that might be, they might have made a picture since.
That's a cool picture.
interesting that it would be taken from not the street side, and that the door would not be on the street.
well,
Well,
the
it was
street
built- it was-
now versus
Right,
back then.
right, like was that, right.
There
No,
may have
it
been
wa-
a street that accessed the school.
Was it originally part of the Holy Angel
No,
campus?
never. No.
Nothing.
It was a neighborhood.
No, it was
Would make more
before, it
sense.
it predates Holy Angels.
You say that photo's from 1905?
Yes,
Like, it predates, I mean, in the 1857 map, only Elm Street is there. Nothing west of Elm Street is there. So,
We're also so like kind of car dominant as a society, and like for our own particular projects, staying from the street,
Right.
like their mindset might not
Right.
be as front and back as ours.
I think I did find a
because the thing
newspaper
would be
article
is
that talks
to
about,
identify that building way
that
far in
references
the
that
corner.
school. It's
Maybe
interesting they
couldn't
built a
have
school
gotten the
there
property
before a
between the
lot of
building
houses
and
were there.
Elm Street, and then
That's what
later
I thought
on they
was
bought it
interesting.
and that became their entrance.
That's
Who knows?
very possible.
Yeah.
Well, now I kind of want to go trespass.
I don't think,
Is it trespassing? It's like, it's an apartment building, right? I'm just visiting somebody.
yeah, I think you'd be fine, Aaron.
When
I don't
that
think
school
there
was
was,
built, because I wonder if you were supposed to access it from Lake Street.
Maybe. I mean,
then
it was built
Holy
around
Angels.
1860, 65, right
Yeah, and
around
then the
there.
Holy Angels campus, I wonder if you were supposed to, like, the main entrance is facing Lake Street,
Wow.
right?
you
It
could,
is- it
not
is
before.
now. It didn't look like, it looked like it was a gable entrance.
I mean, well, hang on.
yeah, I mean, I have no idea what the land use was in the
I mean,
Holy
this-
Angels campus part of
This
Holy
looks like it was
Angels.
the main entrance, right?
Maybe.
And
Possibly.
then these look like they were always windows.
Yeah.
Yes, those, I would say,
And this main entrance faces Lake Street.
Well, can you go further down the street? Go further down. See that road there? I'm wondering if you drove down that road, went around back, and the entrance was there, and then you came back on the other side.
Now, yes, now I want to go.
Now,
Yeah, they want you to come in before you enter the building. Yeah.
yeah.
Who knows?
Well,
You consider people use
Maybe there was an agreement with the neighborhood that the entrance would be away from the houses, so all the kids wouldn't disturb them gathering as they.
Who knows the reason?
that's quite coordination between
DRB condition.
Or it could be they wanted
I
a
don't think
green
they
in
did that
front of the
then.
school where the kids would play at recess and all the families could see the kids out.
Build a junkyard
It
next
could,
to it.
it could be a very political story. It could be quite a political story as to
No, I
why
think
the school was
68
built, where it was built, when it was built.
Yeah.
Because
And why it's backwards.
I think it predates an awful lot of the neighborhood.
Well, I know what I'm gonna do
There
with my
had to be a reason it was set so far back from the street.
I think
wish I
those
could do that.
volumes
Sounds
of
like so much more fun.
literature you said there at the church might have some answers as to,
There might have been a house in
or
front
create more
of it.
confusion, or.
Yeah, there might have been a house there and the guys.
Well,
didn't
I'm
want to
just
sell.
looking at the 1871 map, which is before the Holy Angels was built or even thought of. And
And then ask people why they did something.
it
Or
is, or
alternatively,
it's
why they
not,
didn't do
there are
something.
houses in front
Well, I
on
go
Lake
tell them
Street,
weren't
so
they
it was
for
oriented to
sales deals.
Elm Street.
Do we know when that
weirdly.
school was built?
How strange to have a door.
What?
Do we know when the school was built?
Based on its style, I would say 1860 to 65, right around, 60 to 65, 1860 to 65.
That old?
Oh, yeah. It predates, I mean, it's there in 1871, and I think it was built before a lot of these houses. I mean, the LaSalle brick houses were 1865.
1879.
Which is pretty cool, because it's much older than the other
Much older than I
neighborhood,
thought it
the
was.
other neighborhood
Yeah.
schools that are still standing in
Yeah,
town.
much older. I thought
And it
was
still
built at the
has a
same time.
great integrity architecturally.
Yeah.
When was Holy Angels built?
Well,
1870s.
it started, I mean, I think it was, the keystone was laid in 1872, but it wasn't actually finished until,
And the school
a
is
decade later.
1899, I think, the main school, not the new school.
18 what, 99?
99, I think is what the
The
cornerstone
convent was 99,
Yep.
by which time I think the church was finished in 88, maybe?
Do we want to see anything else in any of the neighborhoods while Chip
I
is
think
right there?
Yeah, I'm good.
You're good? Everyone's good? So next steps. What's our next step, Lisa? We have to start working, well, Chip, how close are we on the photos?
We need Lake Street and, there are a couple other streets we need.
I'm off now. Give me a list.
Yeah, you've already taken many, but
I mean,
Happy to-
if
happy to
there's a
have you take
quota,
more.
I mean,
yeah.
So our next step is the very forms, right? That's what we got to do next?
Yeah, I mean, we have to all agree and get Elizabeth to agree on the boundaries of where we're going to survey.
Okay, so we got to come up with a boundary first.
A boundary of, for the survey, yes, and what's reasonable. And I think probably Elizabeth alluded to this, a priority list, like the highest priority for the Berry Farms is the center section where we know we want to document, and then as, money and time allow, continue out.
Okay.
But as long as we get her agreement to don't bother anything, doing Berry Farms for anything east of the brook.
Okay.
I think that's a place to start.
So Lisa, do you want to contact Louise? You want me to contact Louise?
I can.
Okay, and let's at least get some, let's get at least feedback, whether we should add that next block. See
Yeah.
what she says.
Well, right. It would be good to know.
Yeah, it would be good to know.
I also, I should probably come back and look at those records at some point.
Yeah.
Or take a look.
So I'm sure she based some of it off those records in the church too.
I'll talk to her.
Talk to her and see.
So are we adjusting our street extent? If we haven't done Lake Street yet, we need to take pictures. Are we adjusting how far east we're going on Lake?
East? Yes, I would say that.
Ended at,
Okay, there's,
Oh, wait,
right
let's
on
go
the
back.
brook, right next to the brook, I would say there is this one building that we should survey. It's an older commercial building, I don't know its number.
okay,
The red commercial building on Lake Street
White. No,
that's
it's white.
is on the south side of the street.
It's on the north side, the one I'm thinking of is on the north side. Is it? It's long, goes
Where
back.
Handy's Auto used to be? Is that the one
It
you're
might be an
talking about?
auto,
Or was
Yes.
that the Buick dealer?
The front
The
building,
white one that
it
goes
was,
way back.
it was
that one.
Krupp Motors. That was
Yeah.
Krupp Motors.
Is it that one, or is that the one
Looks like
that's,
an historic building.
what?
Oh, it is. It is. It's not a very nice building. Spent some time in there.
There's
but
the Quonset hut, that was the St. John the Baptist.
That's correct. It was the back of the St.
Oh,
John the
that's
Baptist.
cool.
And I was talking about that,
This house, and this house.
and I was talking about that red building, that was, at least at one time, was Cross Brothers were in there. There was a commercial entity, and there were some other things.
What are our thoughts on this one?
That one's been changed.
Yeah.
But the red one is quite great. But again, these are just over the line I was suggesting, but that's okay on Lake Street, I would think.
That red one up on the top floor has some like super cool features.
Mansard roof.
So if
Yeah.
we give up on Maple, we give up on these right here.
Yes, we are going to, I recommend giving up on them. There are, as Joe mentioned, there are some nice houses there that would be contributing if there was more around them. But now, there's a huge building across the street from them
Right.
that
They're cut off.
impacts the.
They're kind of, they're isolated.
Yeah.
So it should start here.
Yeah,
Great house.
yeah, it's a fun house. Now, that's an early house, that's probably 1870s.
Yeah. Is it more of a Dutch colonial than a
Well, it's called a,
mansard roof?
because it's not a hip, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting point.
I
I
came
don't-
that close
I
to
would have
what I
called
know
it a,
Really?
I mean, it's just the brackets suggest to me that it was more of a French
You can't.
mansard type.
Second
This is too
Empire?
many.
Second,
chips against
thank you.
It's not the building, it's.
That one, I'm sure we can
People-
find a
I-
historic
I
picture
can't.
of though, right?
I wouldn't be able to
Probably,
handle that.
maybe?
It surprised me sometimes what pictures you can find of buildings and what pictures you can't find of buildings.
Does the Historical Society have a collection of
Yeah,
pictures
they
that
have
aren't
street-
scanned?
Yeah, they go by, no, I don't, not everything is scanned.
136
So
grand.
that's another thing I'd love
Yeah.
to look at.
But they do have them by streets.
But I would have lived in there for 2 years, put my thing back together.
It's good.
So that's where we would start on Lake.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of non-contributing down at that end, the gas station, and
That's quite a house right there.
that's where this all started for me. I was doing a regulatory review of that house because of some federal funding that was going into it. And
But the building across from Gays Market, the brick commercial building where the Reynolds house, is no, okay.
Yeah, other way.
Other way.
Other way.
Yo, where was Gays Market?
Gays Market is
Yeah.
just
You
right
just went
there.
by it.
That's Gays Market.
Right there, yeah.
So that beige building across the street, right there. I'm told that that was an inn or a
There
hotel of
wasn't-
sorts. I don't have any evidence of that, but
Was
there
it hotel?
was an inn, but I thought it was on the other side of the street. Do I have that? There was an
never-
inn
I've
called
never
the
actually
Park
researched it,
View
but I-
House? Hang on.
that's correct. That is correct.
Mark Reynolds.
Correct.
One of my Cub Scout meetings.
My Cub Scout meetings were also there one year. I got to play with a glue gun.
Mine was at the Congregational Church.
I never had them at home. This is awesome.
Where the congregation.
I don't remember when I glued together.
Okay, so we gotta do Lake Street.
And we got Elizabeth has raised her hand.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Hi, so I'm gonna have to sign off in 5 minutes, so I just wanted to chime in. I just double checked with the grant agreement. It says, it defines that you're gonna survey this neighborhood and survey approximately 300 properties. So, I'm happy to, after you guys finish your discussion tonight, to follow up with any combination of you. If you have any questions about how you want to shape that boundary finally. I know we have the survey map that we initially started with, but I think that you can adjust it without us needing to do a formal grant amendment. So Any questions for me before I sign off?
No, this was helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much for participating. Really helpful.
No, this was great, and I'm so happy that you guys are undertaking this. And you know, I know that there is a desire to capture everything and all the time, but there's a limit to resources. So I'm available to help you guys figure out if you have any questions about how you want to best use your resources. So
Are you in tomorrow?
I am on the road in the morning, but I'm available in the afternoon.
I have some questions I'd like to run by you on another project. Since I have you here, I figured I could ask if you were.
Yeah. If it's project review questions, I'm not the best person anymore. If it's eligibility questions, I am.
It's modifications to a historic building.
Oh, here we go.
It's not tax credit, but isn't that your forte still or not?
I am no longer on the project review team. So project review is now Greg and Will.
It's who?
Greg Szynski and Will Gansel.
Okay, I never talked to them. I guess I'll call them then.
They're both great. And you can always talk to Caitlin with questions too, or me. It's just, Laura's been very clear that my time is no longer project review, so that it's a clean transition. So.
Yep, no, that's fine. I want some feedback before I start some things, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Great. Thank you all.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
She's the state historic architect.
Oh,
Remember Devin Coleman?
yeah,
Who's Devin's position?
okay.
He's at UVM.
Correct.
Yep. So you talked to Louise,
And so she's a
I'm gonna
gatekeeper
talk
for
to
these
Louise.
projects.
and if you can get some stuff to
So-
Chip
So we talked
about what her,
So you do these projects.
after talking to her and what she says,
There are a handful of them.
then I think
And then
you make a recommendation to
she has to be
Chip,
happy with it. If she's happy
Okay.
and
with it.
then Chip can get it out to us, and then we can figure out what we do from
Usually
there.
just sign
And we can add things up to make sure we're still at
They're
around
okay.
300 properties.
No, we will be.
Yeah.
And it goes to the National Park Service.
And then we can figure out
That just got
whether we're gonna include that or not.
The photos, forms, and boundaries are kind of the first phase. Is
Yeah.
it too early to start brainstorming on the second phases, or is that getting way ahead of ourselves, or is there?
I mean, I'd like to go live in a cave for 4 years.
We can start on the very form.
Yeah,
To be,
it's-
I
She
have
won't
to be
get any,
protective
like,
of
civic
my
awards from
hours,
them.
just-
No,
That's what I was wondering if, like, on our end, if we should be doing anything to,
Well, I think that
We can start on the very forms as long as we start in the center of that district.
right.
Because we're not gonna
That's all
eliminate
kind of part of the
those.
first
Yep.
phase, but I'm wondering if there's anything as a group we could be doing to kind of prepare for the second phase, I guess.
Well, as I said, I think there are some historical, more research that could be done to flesh out the story that I won't have an opportunity to follow up on. But,
Like,
well, as I said, if you wanted to trace some of the names from like the 1880 survey back to the 1850 survey and find out where, like, there are French names that do not identify as from Canada or their parents from Canada, but you could look back just to check that some of those families would show up in the 30 years before as actually immigrants. That's the piece that doesn't show up in the census data, for example. But other things that, again,
Are you looking for
I'm very
specific
interested in
names?
the idea of, what businesses were serving the community, especially in the construction area. Like, who was the aluminum siding salesman?
Yeah, he hit our section.
Yep, you hit a lot of them.
I guess I was just thinking almost like completely hypothetical, but say
There's a movie on that.
did research through the
10
railroad
men.
and found out that there
I
was
think you're
some
right.
French-Canadian
I've
club
watched
through the
it.
railroad that met once a month because there was such a,
Scummy
like, is that,
inside.
if you
There
were
are-
to stumble across things, or?
I have some
There are
different
clubs
code.
that I have identified, and I have more data that I
Gotcha.
didn't put in here. Based on the
And they
directories,
spray paint
they
the
list the clubs. at different points, and there definitely were some clubs related to the
Perfect underneath.
railroad or not. I mean, there were.
Why?
That was the thing.
Or the church or the schools. Or
Yeah, I mean, the
businesses.
church had auxiliary clubs, especially for women, but they also encouraged some of these fraternal organizations that were, you know, like the Elks and the others similar. They are often mutual aid. They would often sometimes be insurance. They would offer insurance, and a lot of their members would be from that community.
Like the
Also, we would
Foresters and
have-
like the.
I mean, the Society de Saint Jean Baptiste was big, and it was one of St. Albans chapter was one of the earliest in the U.S. It's a Canadian organization, but that was an annual. I mean, tomorrow is Saint Jean Baptiste Day, and that was a big celebration in the
So
community.
it's like the
It used to
history of
be.
the blocks.
So it sounds like you're way ahead of where I was thinking. I was wondering if there's anything we could do to contribute, but you're already way
I
way ahead of anything
probably
I've.
went
a lot of
way too
information.
far. I couldn't help myself.
No, it's just, I know there's only so much scale and scope you could.
I was looking like Louise.
Yeah, but I think,
gave me a little data sheet.
you know,
One of my
really
great-grand
mapping
John
out
Montang
more
was
from
a
the
state rep for 1 year in
directories.
1950. And
It
the,
says not, I mean,
Our
up until
African
a certain point, when you
American
don't list
community
your
was also right
occupation
down
anymore,
LaSalle
but
Street. I did a
it
write-up
tells,
on that.
you know, what you
Grace
did,
family
what your
was a boxer
your
from
mail
down there,
family did, and
bunch
what,
of others.
where your
Actually,
house
very
was.
interesting.
It's pretty
yeah,
cool.
and it's not as big with the Jewish community around like White Street.
Oh, yeah.
Is anything else in your eyes?
Because on
We just gotta figure
Federal
out,
Street
we'll
is
send out,
Cynical.
we'll be looking for volunteers to do the rest of the
Mostly
photos.
destroyed. I don't know, there's not much left.
no, it's,
And do we have retakes?
see,
Are there still a bunch of retakes we
There are
need?
a few,
That,
Okay.
that,
not so
that
many.
is, yes.
I
And there's a
mean,
lot of
that
it
was
that's
pretty
some
good
tight
job, I
streets have
thought.
disappeared.
I
yeah,
think I made a list
Like
of
when they
ones
did the
that
co-op
needed to
store.
be retaken.
Right.
it's true.
So we need
That's
to
what
coordinate the
New
very
Street
forms.
doesn't
Yeah,
exist anymore.
are you gonna be here when we first do the very forms to take us through and sort of, or are you gonna do it on screen and give us an idea of what we're doing?
Either way, either way.
Do you have a
I
trip
see the number,
here,
is there only 4
or
of us?
how many trips do you have left?
I don't,
It's-
I
they're
don't
only-
remember
oh, no,
if
Trish,
I
I
had
said
more than
Trish.
one trip.
Yes.
I think I did, actually. So,
She hasn't become a
I think it would be nice if the first time we did the very forms, you were here to walk us through, and then as we're doing them, maybe you go to person to person, just look and see, make sure.
sure, so everyone bring their
But she
laptop
comes
and
to
Everyone would bring their laptop or whatever, or
we can do that.
Yeah, for the
grab
sand
whatever
director.
city laptops we have.
Yes. Well, that was always the rule.
or-
Sure. Let's decide when, you know, let me know when
Yeah,
it should
we'll
be.
figure out when.
All right,
Does that sound like a plan for everyone?
sounds reasonable.
Yeah, so let me know if you have another plan to come up.
I don't have, I mean, you know, I'm guided by you guys.
All right. Okay.
I think we need to figure out,
Unfortunately, I live in literally the diametrically opposite
it's
corner
not
of the
funny.
state.
but I think we need to figure out the district. So we need some help from Louise and you, and whether we should add that neighborhood or not.
You know, as you heard her say over and over again, they're really big on, just give us the data first. Let's just get the data. The survey.
Well, if we can back up that this this area belongs or doesn't belong,
Yeah, I
if we
mean,
can defend it.
yes, I think easily.
Okay. Anything else from anybody?
No, I'm good. This has been,
Then I guess I'll adjourn the meeting.
All right.
thank you, everyone.
Good, thank you.
Glad we are not out there.
Yeah, whoever's in charge of the AC in this room,
Thank you.
I thank them.